Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland Reviewer. Welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film and just chugging along on the Scorsese train. Still got months ahead of us, but we're making it through. And this week, got my friend Alex here to talk about The Last Temptation of Christ. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks, man. Yeah, no, I'm glad I remember you when you invited me on for this. It was a while ago now, but yeah, I've watched this movie a few times over the years, and it's I have some interest in it. I love Scorsese. I think it's one of his best films, and I'll probably talk about my grandfather a couple of times. My grandfather was a theologian, and he really liked this story. He really liked the novel. I think he had read the novel and he liked the movie. But of course, we'll probably talk about how it pissed a lot of people off. And he had colleagues who were upset by it, who didn't like it. And he thought it was great. So
How dare Jesus have sex with a prostitute or
right,
have sex in general?
right. I'm going to say I think there were other things that bothered people even more than the sex. Specific things about things he said that bothered them, if not just as much, if not more.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
So we will be getting there.
yeah.
But if you've ever watched this show before, you know we have three parts here, and we start off with coming attractions. And this week, this episode's dropping on December 17th, and we're almost wrapping up 2021, which is insane. And it's time for a whole bunch of movies to be dropping. So we have one film that got really close to being my pick was Nightmare Alley, Guillermo del Toro's new film, which shamelessly plug, I should be having a Sif Pop review coming out for that next week. So, but Alex, what was the film coming out this week that you were most excited about? Piqued your interest the most?
I forget the title already. I'm sorry.
That is okay. It is The Lost Daughter,
The
which is
Lost
coming
Daughter.
out in theaters this week
Yeah.
and coming out on Netflix in like 2 weeks.
Yeah. It's always interesting when an actress or an actor tries to make a movie. It could be great, or it might not be so good. It all depends. And like when Joseph Gordon-Levitt did Don John, it was like, whoa,
I love that movie.
But when Robert De Niro did The Good Shepherd, it was like, oh, like it was just a frustrating, drag you through the mud. So it's always interesting. And it just sounds like a good, intimate film. Definitely a feminine side, strong feminine side to it. So yeah, it just sounds interesting. As a 35-year-old man, that's where I'm at.
There we go. And Maggie Gyllenhaal's making her directorial debut with this. And I was looking at the cast list, and her husband, Peter Sarsgaard, is also in the film, but starring Olivia Colman, who's coming for another Oscar. She wants another one after she won for The Favorite a couple years ago. I love her. She's great. Even small roles in like Hot Fuzz as like the one female cop.
Oh, damn.
Who
was her?
Yep.
Oh my God. Wow.
Rewatching that movie on my birthday last month. There's so many people in Hot Fuzz in so many random roles.
True.
But that's not what we're talking about. But Dakota Johnson's in it. I love Jessie Buckley. She's also going to be in Lost Daughter. So it's definitely a stacked week. There's a lot of really quality films that are supposed to be coming out. And having been a huge fan of Marvel movies almost my whole life, and then with, the MCU since 2008, I almost had to put No Way Home as my most anticipated movie because this has been the most obnoxiously talked about movie since Zack Snyder's Justice League finally came out.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if Sony drops any more footage, I'm going to punch them in the face. I'm going to try to avoid at all costs. I'm seeing it. When this drops, I would have already seen it because I'm seeing it on the 16th. And
nice.
Like, will they, won't they? Will Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield be in this movie? If they're not, I'm definitely going to laugh in the theater when the credits start rolling, because I'm going to troll everybody who's just super pissed off that they weren't in the movie. But, it is one of those things where it's just like, I'm more excited about the actual film of Nightmare Alley, but like to say that I'm not anticipating No Way Home coming out would be an understatement. So I think that's why I'm going with that. But it's going to be an interesting week. And even more interesting what's coming out after this week, because literally there's like 3 days with like 3 or 4 movies dropping leading into Christmas, because it's the season. And then these are going to get a lot less interesting once January rolls around.
Yeah.
Because F you, it's January. But those are our coming attractions for this week. And time to jump into our feature, Last Temptation of Christ. So to get a little background, this is a very interesting film in the case of like having watched all of Scorsese's films up to this point in a row every week. It was very interesting watching his first like 5 or 6 films, because they all had a very strong religious either like undertones or like in your face. Like you could definitely feel like the Catholic guilt in things, like Mean Streets and like his original film. Like you could feel that. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is Boxcar Bertha had a literal crucifixion in it.
I never saw that.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And what's so interesting is on the set of Boxcar Bertha, Barbara Hershey gave Martin Scorsese this novel. That was the from Nikos Kazantzakis, who wrote this novel, and apparently Scorsese read this novel, and that's where the spark came in the early 70s to make Last Temptation of Christ. This was supposed to be officially his follow-up to The King of Comedy, but he lost financing. So it kind of pushed it back. He wound up making, from what it looked like, he wound up making After Hours, which is a much smaller film. He made The Color of Money, which was probably his most studio-y kind of film, because, it was a sequel and had Paul Newman and Tom Cruise in it. I really enjoyed talking about that on the show last week. I flew solo last week. But he finally got some money, but not as much as he wanted. So they had to like film this in like 30-something days. And he was contractually obligated to make a big studio film after this, which was Cape Fear. Okay. So, which is also an interesting Scorsese movie. So I'm not surprised that was something like, wasn't like a passion project for him. But you could definitely tell Robert De Niro was committed.
Yeah, they made it. I know that Cape Fear, they wanted Steven Spielberg to direct it initially. That was my understanding.
Interesting.
And then they got Scorsese. And of course, once you get Scorsese, you get Bobby De Niro. I'm surprised Robert De Niro didn't play Jesus in Last Temptation, actually.
Can you imagine? So before we jump into the film, can you imagine New York Jesus and New York Judas going at it? Because and that's another thing, because like this film got Scorsese an Oscar nomination for Best Director. It picked up some Golden Globe nominations. I'm pretty sure Barbara Hershey got nominated for Golden Globe. Peter Gabriel did as well for his score, which so weird. Peter Gabriel scoring this movie.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought Willem Dafoe was snubbed for playing Jesus. And then Harvey Keitel got nominated for a Golden Razzie for Worst Supporting Actor.
Really? See that? Okay. So I want to talk about that, because thank God it wasn't Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro, because it would have been just been a joke for the rest of the time. So in the beginning of the movie, I have to admit, Harvey Keitel, it just doesn't feel like it fits in the beginning. However, as the film progresses, I start to really fall in love with his performance. I start to really feel like the love and devotion that he has to Jesus. And And then that scene in the alternate reality,
Yes.
that scene when he walks in and he says, "You were supposed to die on the cross, you coward. We did what we were supposed to do. Why didn't you do what you were supposed to do?" I immediately just become like a puppy in his hands. I'm like, okay, you're Judas. I get it. You're like, so I almost feel like the way they approached having Judas be this kind of brutish, slap you around guy, which Harvey Keitel does very well. It just didn't feel like Judas, so it was like it didn't fit for a lot of people and it maybe they could have reshot or rewrote the way they used him in the beginning, but it what's great about it is that performance just gets better as the movie goes on.
Mm-hmm. I do agree with that. And like definitely at the beginning when you first see him with that like redhead Jerry curl that he has, it's a little like, and like Scorsese makes the choice for everybody to like speak in their actual accents for the most part and everything.
Right.
And because like, you have like David Bowie popping up later, sound like David Bowie as Pontius Pilate. And because, a good Roman has to have a British accent, right? But like they just let Keitel do it. But boy, did he convince me in that scene at the very end. I'm just like, oh, like this is powerful. And I wouldn't want to mess with him. He's mad. He's mad at Jesus. And it's so interesting too, because like, I'm trying to think, this might be Keitel's last Scorsese film until The Irishman.
Okay.
Wow. Because Keitel was his original muse,
right?
Even before De Niro. Mm-hmm. And then obviously De Niro got replaced after Casino with Leo. Mm-hmm. And now Leo and De Niro are going to be in the same one. He better get Keitel for Killers of the Flower Moon too.
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, it's like, this has such an interesting cast. So interesting. Yeah. And like Keitel's such an interesting choice. And like, at the beginning of the movie, it was straight murking people, just like snapping necks and stuff like that. I'm like, I was just sitting there like, huh.
Yeah.
Because like, I watched this movie once before today.
Okay.
So like I had seen it before and I remember a lot about it. And I do remember New York Judas just being like, it's Harvey Keitel.
And he is New York Judas. That is true, without a doubt, man.
And I forgot the beginning part where he just comes in like smashing Jesus's work and just being like stomping it and then going out and like straight snapping people's necks.
Calling him a disgrace. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like I said, did you read the novel?
I have not.
I've never read it, but having it start with him making crosses, because everyone knows he's a carpenter. He's making crosses, and then Judas is destroying them, and and then Mary Magdalene spits in his face, mm-hmm. when he's walking the cross to crucify somebody else.
Yeah.
So you're seeing, I mean, it's humility, but it's just flat out brutal and devastating. And that's how the film opens, basically. It's
and this is going to sound silly, but it kind of reminds, so going to bring up Clerks here. The whole conversation about like building the Death Star, and it's just like, as like a construction worker, like they guilty because like they help make the Death Star. Like Jesus here is helping making these crosses, but like, he's doing his job. He's a carpenter. He's taking work. Like,
sure.
But obviously the other Jewish people around are not very happy at him.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Well, it's guilt, it's incredibly guiltifying, and I think, and Harvey Keitel saying shameful and disgraceful. And so it's one of those things. I will admit, I grew up, I was Catholic growing up. Now I'm agnostic, mm-hmm. Which just seems to make most sense for me. But I remember whenever I was in church, I'd always have to find something funny to think about, like, because I would just like, I would not be paying attention, when I was a kid. And so that kind of happens a little bit with this movie, because some of it does feel like church. And then
Yeah.
it's like Scorsese's version of the church. But what I couldn't help but think, remember the scene where they're passing the bread around? It's the Last Supper. If you could guess what character I thought about, what movie I thought about when they're passing the bread around, it's like, well, what if they run out of bread and somebody's like left without a piece of bread?
Are you talking about Office Space?
I'm talking about Milton from Office Space.
Oh no!
I'm just like imagining him like.
But what about my Eucharist?
I didn't get any bread. Like I was just like started laughing my ass off because I'm like obviously I'm not taking this seriously.
Well, and that's an interesting thing too, because it's like I'm also a confirmed Roman Catholic, and like
Yeah.
I would also describe myself as agnostic at this point, but like I don't practice, like, I don't go to church or anything like that. I haven't been for years. But I found this so interesting because it's like, obviously, making Jesus human and very like filled with humanity in this film is not exactly the story that people believe. And Scorsese taking that approach with it, even with the disclaimer at the beginning being like, not adapting the gospel here, just processing my own faith here.
Right.
So
Right.
don't shoot me.
Because it was obviously something when Scorsese read the novel, obviously it resonated with him, and going back to look at the Harvey Keitel character in Mean Streets.
Yep.
He has his faith, and he's like
introduced in a church.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There you go. I mean he really, these guiltifying character, guilt plays a big role in a lot of Scorsese's films and his main characters. And so of course he was going to be drawn to Jesus. He was going to become a priest. If he didn't become a director, he would have become a priest. That's what he said. So it makes a lot of sense. And the human element, by the way, Shane, is what, before we got into the video, we were talking about how he ends up coming down from the cross and he has sex with Mary Magdalene. But what pisses people off more is not just the sex, but all the humanness that they're allowing this version of Jesus to have, coming down from the cross, having pride, and basically, I mean, that's what I think that's what really pissed people off, is that God doesn't have pride, God doesn't, lust for power. God doesn't, want to start a, the idea of him just coming down from the cross is a major, like, you can't do that, it's that major sacrilegious thing to do. But the battle, like you said, like, it's a novelization, the battle between the flesh and the spirit. And ironically, as many people were pissed off by this story, it's the most relatable story of Jesus I've ever seen, heard, read, anything, because it's not about purity. It's the God's too far. And then, by the way, they talk about this directly in the film, in the dialogue, and so it's important for people to understand when they say, it's a novelization, but for me, it is like, wow, this is such a relatable story. This movie, actually, I went to church a couple of times after I would see this movie because it made me more interested in the Gospels and what Jesus was trying to say. So I think that that's important for people to keep in mind.
And it's such an interesting, because like my fiance Jess, for all of those watching, had never seen this before. We were watching this earlier, and like she was thinking like, oh, this movie's wrapping up, like he's getting put on the cross and stuff like that. It's just like, And what was so interesting was she straight up said, "This is the Green Knight." And I'm like, so Alex, I don't know if you saw the Green Knight that came out
Not
this
the
year.
recent one. I remember
Yeah.
I remember the Arthurian legend from
So
back.
not to go into it, but too much because I don't want to spoil it, but like the Green Knight takes a diversion. It kind of takes a what if scenario at one point and runs with it. And like over time, the story progresses, and then you're snapped back to one specific point. And it was the same exact. So like, and then Jess and I were going back and forth. It's like, what influenced what? Because like obviously the Bible came first, but this isn't a Bible story.
This came in the 70s.
So this was a book,
I think.
but you know, the story of Gawain came from like medieval times. But apparently that part of the story wasn't part of the tale. I think David Lowery, the director, put that in it. So I'm like, was he last temptation of Christing the Green Knight? And no matter which one influenced the other, it was a very interesting storytelling device of like, here's a pivotal moment, and let's tempt this character with the life that they really want.
Yeah.
And then come back at them and say, you could do this, or you could do what you're supposed to. And that's really what this story does, is Judas is the one coming in being like, hey, what gives?
Yeah.
Like, what do you
Judas.
do?
Al Pacino as Judas, of course.
Oh, they should, you know what? Should have just got Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Jesus and Judas. What a movie. What a movie that would have been.
So can we, now you make a sidebar here. Willem Dafoe.
Yes.
For crying out loud. My God. He
Kills
is
it.
incredible in this movie. He's amazing. I love him. He is Jesus in this movie. I don't care. He is Jesus. While this movie is playing, that's Jesus. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. Willem Dafoe is Jesus. You know.
Which it's, I also made a joke earlier. Willem Dafoe is all about resurrection. Because like, he's supposed to be in the new Spider-Man coming out.
Oh,
and,
that's right.
Like the Green Goblin's back. I'm like, well, just make it a comeback.
There you go.
Just like Jesus.
He is the man. He is the man.
And
Jackson is the man. He's also the man.
Like the more and more films that I see with Willem Dafoe in it, it just keeps reinforcing the fact that he's an incredible actor, and he is so committed.
And he's perfect for this because something very human, something very sweet, something very empathetic tends to come across about his characters. You know, even the Green Goblin, you know, yes, it's, you know, he gets turned into the Green Goblin, but the guy who isn't the Green Goblin has a very sweet side. He doesn't want to do these things. And, you know, of course he'd be a good pick for Jesus.
Well, and it's very interesting because he played a Christ-like figure in Platoon after this. Because like having watched Platoon with him and then Tom Berenger as his foil, and like, well, it's so interesting because Willem Dafoe can play that character so well, and then you see those moments of like when he's at that temple screaming, "I will baptize all in fire," and like that power was incredible. And like that's that kind of like manic Willem Dafoe that you see in a lot of movies. Like he was, and then he turns it on a dime once that blood starts pouring from his palms, and then he looks like he has no idea what to do, and like Judas grabs him and like gets him the hell out of there. And that was incredible shift of acting there in that scene, because he's going from like full on power rage to vulnerability and just like, I need somebody to help me. and like Harvey Keitel jumps into action and just grabs him. Because that's the thing, because like Judas is a hard character, and like there's not a lot of moments where he's like shaken.
Right.
And there's like, I think there's like one little moment, which also interesting casting, Harry Dean Stanton pops up in this movie.
That's one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie. I think that tells the whole story.
Well, right, and there. So we'll get to that in a second, because like there's the moment where he confronts Judas. It's like, you were supposed to kill him. And like you have that exchange, but then later in the film, are you talking about when he confronts Jesus?
I'm sorry, I forgot. Because I didn't recognize him earlier. I thought that was him, but then when he pops up in the alternate reality,
and when Jesus is like, stop saying that didn't happen, that wasn't me. And when he's just like, I don't care if it wasn't you, I don't care, like, and that the whole entire thing, like, that's faith, right?
Yep. Right.
And it's like committing to something that you can believe in. Even if it might not be exactly what happened. And I think that exchange, like you said, captures the story exactly what it's supposed to be. And I think that's the difference between, like, do you believe the gospel as fact, or this is something to inspire faith? And and that was a really powerful scene between the two of them, because like Harry Dean Stanton's a great actor. One of the greatest character actors ever, because like, you know, just popping up in everything. But like, it's Brain from Escape from New York.
I actually don't think I love that movie, and I hate it. Like, I don't think he's good in that movie, but that's for a different time.
But well, he has plenty of wins, because he was like in hundreds of movies.
Totally.
So they're just popping up and stuff.
Alien.
But like, it's so interesting too, because you have him in this film. You have Andre from Dinner with Andre is John the Baptist.
Let me see. Oh wow. What's it? Well, Andre Gregory.
Yes,
John the Baptist. Okay.
Dinner with Andre.
That's crazy.
That's Andre.
Yeah.
Because like it's Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory just chilling at a table for 2 hours.
This is so random, but my cousin in Long Island is his assistant. He's getting old now. Like, you know, she's telling, but it's just random. I just, like, every time she always reminds me of that. I'm like, you're that guy's assistant.
Well, and there's so many like just small recognizable people, like you have like director Irvin Kershner, who directed Empire Strikes Back, was the older gentleman who was wanting to throw the stones at Mary Magdalene.
That's what I thought you were gonna say.
Yeah, and it's just like looking through this cast, there's just like so many random people. I'm like, why is David Bowie in this movie? I'm like, David Bowie is in this movie, and he's just Pontius Pilate.
Of course he is. Yeah.
And there's like, you know, it's Scorsese. There's a lot of bold choices. Like, Scorsese is a bold filmmaker, and I think that's what makes him so iconic. And like, I'm gonna make a movie about Jesus, and I'm gonna get Peter Gabriel to do the score. And what an interesting score this movie has.
Yeah, it's different. I think the first time I watched it, it didn't sit well with me. Like, it felt a little jarring, because you could tell the different, like, those 1980s production drums, which is very, you know, think Miami Vice, like boombastic drum sounds. But somehow or another, I guess now I expect it. So now as part of this film, I expect it, you know, and it also kind of brings in like a little bit of that modern flair. I think that's another thing you need to talk about when we talk about this movie, like the way the music is done, the sound, and there's also these very artsy, like, indie things that he kind of allows himself to do in this movie. There's even like a little shaky shot when it's going over the trees before we
Yep.
see, and I go, he just let that in. He didn't change it. And it doesn't bother me because I know that some of this is like run and gun filmmaking,
Yep.
you know,
They didn't have time.
and I
It's
kind
like,
of love that, you know. So
well, and you can feel the passion in this because like obviously like he wanted to make this movie. And the studio's like, well, if you really want to make this movie, you're gonna get the Clint Eastwood timeline. And like Clint Eastwood would just be like, well, let's go. Just on to the next scene.
Yeah, I guess we better get started today. Yeah.
So, but like, and there's definitely Scorsese moments because like I pointed one out to Jess when like the guy's like, we're running out of wine. It's like, what's over there? Oh, just water. It's just like, it's wine.
Mm.
And he goes over and he drinks like, it's wine. And then it turns over and that snap zoom in on Jesus with the smirk on him, just like, that's a Scorsese shot. Like that quick zoom in.
Yeah.
But like, you definitely have, and like watching all of his films, I'm like, there's always those shots and those kinds of things. And, you know, it's like at the beginning of Goodfellas, which is my next one. So that's going to be a fun one next week.
Yeah.
When it did like that snap zoom in on Henry Hill's face, and he's just like, all my life, I wanted to be a gangster. And then you slam the trunk. Like those shots, it's like Scorsese.
It's great. Yeah, absolutely. He's a master.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute master. And, you know, I think that's another thing that I love about him is that he has these passion projects that will take him a decade or almost 2 decades to make.
I'll be watching this soon.
Yeah, right. That's another one.
Silence
Took him forever. It took him forever to get that movie made. He wanted to make it. He wanted to make it in like 98 or 2000 or something like that. And it was like, no, it's not going to happen. Like it finally happened. But like this movie is over 10 years in the making. The Last Temptation is over 10 years in the making. And you have to love that. You have to love that. And it's also a good lesson for everybody else. Like, okay, you can't do your passion project, do this thing, oh, maybe I can do that now. Nope, do this thing, thing, and maybe I can do it. Okay, yes, finally. So he has a lot of that. I think Goodfellas is basically his that's Goodfellas, Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed, Casino. Those are I'm going to the bank, baby, and I'm going to go in the biggest way possible. And you guys are going to enjoy it. You guys are going to have a good time. That's what those movies are. That's him basically hitting a grand slam,
It's just like, and what's so interesting and what puts him apart is even if it's one of those kinds of movies, it's still so much better than most movies. Because sometimes it's just like, that was just a studio movie I had to make. But no, it's like,
well, and I'm not saying that those are studio movies, but there's certainly movies where he felt like, well, there's enough interest here, and the studio is going to give me what I want. I can do my thing with it,
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a dream. That's a dream for any director to have.
Well, and like watching Goodfellas, it's just so authentically Italian American. It's just like oozing there, just like the razors and the slicing the garlic and everything. And it's just like all those like little tiny things. And that's the two things. Watching all of Scorsese's films so far, you can tell when he's hitting his passion about faith and when he's hitting his passion about being Italian.
Right.
And it's like you could just feel it. And New York. I guess there's 3 things. You can tell how much he loves New York too.
Faith, Italian, and New York.
Yeah.
But back to Last Temptation, where I'm not sure that guilt does play much of a role in Goodfellas, whereas it does play a role in Last Temptation. I think Goodfellas is more about excess and ignorance. And I think that Last Temptation is very much about guilt and pride and lust and love and compassion and all those things. But that, I think that's the thing that pissed people off maybe just as much, if not more, is those see like, yeah, I can change water to wine. I'm Jesus, like he
that
kind
smirk
of
on his face when he did it.
the pride of that. And then that scene, the one that always gets me, which kind of lends itself to that sort of pride, when he's in the desert for the first time with the guy, I forget his name, I don't remember what the character's name is, and he's like, I'm the son of God, but more than that, God. The way he says it, like with that look in his eyes, like I'm like, oh shit, I get like that when I'm talking about my music, or I get like that when it's like, that's what I'm like, yeah, that's more like me. Like, so that's why I like, oh my God, like that, the pride is so relatable. And I don't think that the Jesus that we grew up going to church, learning about, they never talked about him being like, yeah, I could do that, like it wasn't, he was always like given this wash of purity. And that made God have put him at such a distance.
Well,
whereas this brings us closer to it,
And I think a perfect example of that distance is something like Ben-Hur, which Ben-Hur is a tale of the Christ. Like that's the actual subtitle of the book, because it is a parallel of Judah Ben-Hur going on this journey of revenge, and then realizing revenge isn't going to save him, faith is going to save him. And he meets Jesus.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
And Jesus gives him water.
Mm.
Do you see Jesus's face? No.
Right.
You only see him from behind.
Right.
And you only see everybody's reaction to this face. And even like the Roman, they're just like in shock of seeing like this being. And it's just like, there's something higher about this figure. And like, we can't even look at his face. Like, you audience members can't handle it. And this, it's like, Jesus is one of us. And he feels the same kinds of things. And it's all about faith, because like, this film feels like Scorsese has his beliefs in faith and put himself in Jesus and put himself through these trials of trying to keep his faith, because that's really what this was all about. And like that scene where he goes down off the cross and lives that whole entire life is about him. What if I just cast off my faith and did what was easier and what I wanted to do with things? And him being confronted and taking that confrontation and realizing like he needed to go back and die on that cross and keep his faith and commit to what he believed in. And because like he believed he was the son of God, he believed he was God, and that was the sacrifice he needed to make. And I think all of us have had moments where we had something we had to do and we're just like, I don't want to do it. And like every day waking up and going to work, like, gotta go to work though. It's our responsibility. And even if it's like the smallest thing like that, but like we all have had things where it's like we committed to something and could be easier just to run away from it and not confront it. Obviously, I don't think most of us, that commitment was, I'm going to die for my faith. But the thing is, it's like, for us, it's something different, but it's that relatability.
Remember you have to, keep in mind that this is in the face of the brutal Roman Empire, these
goddamn Romans.
Yeah, I mean, this is in the face
Italians.
There we go again. How ironic. Yeah, you have to keep that in mind. I said before that I'm agnostic, and I have a friend, who's a priest who is my father's church, which once was was still my grandfather's, even though my grandfather's passed away, it's still my grandfather's church in Ontario, California. I told him, I said to him, I don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. For me, that's too much, and he looked at me and he said, yeah, it's a symbol, it's a symbol, it's a symbol of, and I was like, oh my God, thank you. It's so refreshing. Because I had priests growing up. I'm sure if I said that to them, they would not be happy,
Yeah, you'd be Jewish.
What's that?
Because I know that's one of the big differences between Christianity and Judaism is like, they don't believe Jesus was the Son of God.
Right.
And then like Christians like hang their whole entire religion on it.
I know. And I think well, I shouldn't say it's a mistake. I think that it's fine if you believe that he was the Son of God. It's fine if you believe he was God. But for me, it makes more sense to look at him as he was, because he did walk the earth. He was, it's funny because in that, my grandfather's favorite scene was when David Bowie, as Pontius Pilate, says, you want to change the way people think and the way they feel. And Rome's not going to have that. You're not going to change the way, people think. And he was that influential, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, like he was that level of influential for people to believe, in love and compassion and what he was trying to say, and so it's for me, it's important to separate the God, the spirit, the universe, whatever it is, from the man, because then now the story is more relatable to me, because I'm seeing someone who is certainly in touch with, not necessarily, maybe it's a spiritual thing, but it's humanity. He was in touch with humanity, and he wanted people to think and to read and to talk and to love and to work together. And so, he was a cultivator. He was an organizer. Of course, he got crucified, and so he was a socialist Jew, and he called himself the Son of God, and part of that was the Roman emperor is not God. The Roman Empire is not divine. Give me that. I'll take that. I'm the Son of God. I'm God. Crucify me. Because by doing that, he's bringing people together. He's unifying them, and he's saying there, and also, the monotheizing process of there is one God of all. Don't worship this and that. No. We need to one. That process came from the Gospels, and the way they wrote the Gospels, so these they touch on those things in a very, in a wonderful way, especially with Harry Dean Stanton in that scene, where he says, look, it's not about you, I Jesus, the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth, I worship him. That's the truth for me. And that's the truth that's going to heal us and bring us together. And that's what it was all about, so, and they did a good job of commenting on that.
Because Christian films have a very specific connotation today. And like a lot of the times they're very preachy, they're probably low budget. And like you watch them, and I think for somebody who isn't like a strong believer, going to look at them and think they're hokey and stupid. But the thing is, it's like, this is a film about faith in a very meaningful way, in a very well-written way. And like, we haven't even mentioned Paul Schrader wrote the screenplay, the same screenwriter of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull.
That's right.
Yeah. And who has made films like First Reform, which our pal Vinny loves. And that's about faith. Wow. And like Ethan Hawke plays a priest in that. who gets radicalized. And this, like that scene with Harry Dean Stanton is like the whole entire point of the movie, but it doesn't feel like it's slapping you in the face with it.
Right.
It doesn't feel like hitting you with a hammer.
And one of the reasons why is because of Jesus's pushback, Jesus's resistance, the human, the guy who chose not to die on the cross, pushing back, against that. So it's like, oh, the truth, what this guy believes in is stronger, is bigger, it's more than what was going on, even in my own heart sometimes it meant more than that, and it was like, it was a wake-up call.
And I appreciate, obviously this film takes a lot of liberties that a lot of people had a lot of problems with. But the thing is that it's an incredibly well written and well directed and well acted and impactful film about faith.
Yeah.
And you have things like, they don't make them like they used to. Like Ben-Hur is a faith-based film.
Right.
It's a 4-hour epic, but it was a faith-based film, and it's one of my favorite films of all time.
Right.
And the thing is, I appreciate the faith in it, but it wasn't something that's hitting you with a sledgehammer. Speaking of Peter Gabriel. But that's why I appreciate this film so much. It's a lot of people are going to find this sacrilegious and blasphemous, but the thing is, there's a true belief and faith in it. Scorsese believes.
Oh, yeah.
It's just a matter of, this is the story that he's creating to help him process through it.
Yeah.
And film's an art form, and an artist can take liberties with things, and that's exactly what he did. And he warned you all at the beginning of the movie.
I felt like in silence when Liam Neeson toward the end of the movie, he picks up the thing, I forget what it was. It was a cross or something Christian, and he's holding it in his hand. And for a moment, he can connect with it again, and somebody comes and snatches it out of his hand. It echoes back to this, it echoes back to that struggle for faith, and not being able to have you. It's such a strong concept, and that's why I'm glad we haven't talked about the sex part of it that much, because I really do think that piece of it is just, it's not good for us to make that big of a deal out of that, because that's a primal thing that we're all hardwired to feel and connect with. And yes, he does that in the film, and I'm sure that pissed people off, but it's those higher level concepts of taking the faith off that's so much more because you can have sex with someone and then go back and have faith. You can cheat on someone and you can get forgiveness. You can sin and have forgiveness. If you atone, if you truly are sorry and you atone for it,
repent.
Repent. Yeah. But you can't, to actually just take it off, and to not be able to do it, or is so much more. So it's a much bigger level, bigger level thinking.
Yeah. What's interesting is I just saw Benedetta, which is from Paul Verhoeven, and most people are going to be like, that's about those lesbian nuns. And on the surface, that's the most obvious thing that people are going to talk about. And yes, were there very graphic sexual scenes in the film? Yes. Very graphic.
Wow.
It is a Paul Verhoeven film. This is the man who made RoboCop and Total Recall and Starship Troopers. So
bulletproof vest, man.
There's no subtlety sometimes when it comes to certain things. But the thing is, it's the same deal with RoboCop. You look at RoboCop and just think this is a crazy mindless gore fest. But there's a lot to say in that film's saying a lot of things. And like, even like, you know, RoboCop's basically a giant Christ allegory. Like he even walks across a little thing of water at the end of the movie, and the climax is just like, but like this film Benedetta, it's gonna be known as like, oh my god, they had lesbian nuns in it, which like that's the surface, but it digs deeper because Benedetta was this nun who had visions of Christ. Okay. And believed that she was the protector of this town against the plague. And it is a deeply film about faith. Yeah. But the thing is, it's like, you could just focus on the fact that like two women have like very aggressive sex in it a couple of times. And which even like that part of the film makes up like, I don't know, 20 minutes of like an over 2-hour movie. But the thing is, like, what it's really about is this, and you can get bogged down in Jesus had sex with somebody, but like you can think about what this film's really about, because this is a 2-hour and 40-minute movie, and like, what was that scene, like a couple minutes, right? Like that's such a small piece of such a bigger picture,
right? The sex part of it is just, yeah, I mean, it's only one piece of it. You know, similar, I didn't think we'd talk about this, but like, you know, Brokeback Mountain, for example, there's not a lot of sex in that movie, and a lot of people won't watch it just because of the one scene where they get close to each other and have sex. The rest of it is just really about the yearning, and it's mostly about yearning.
And the struggle of like, and the struggle of not being able to be yourself.
Yeah.
And this film has that struggle, because like Jesus struggles with like, I could be the man that I am, or I could be this bigger thing.
Right.
And obviously in the end, he realizes he has to be that bigger thing.
Right.
And he dies on that cross. And like I thought it was interesting too, because like instead of this film talking about the resurrection, this film takes that approach of like, he's going to be crucified, and goes on this whole entire alternate life that Jesus has. And then the film comes back and he gets crucified, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't deal with like, he rises from the grave. But like, that's not the point of it. Cause like in the end, it's like, obviously there's a couple of moments where he does things that are not normal. Cause like, you know, he turns water into wine. He takes his heart out at one point.
Sure.
Which I think that's the first point in the movie where you're just like, something supernatural is going on here. Because up to that point, like, and I even made this comment to Jess while we're watching it. It's just like, because you hear like the scree, and then him like grabbing his head and like having that like vision and hearing the voice and stuff like that. And it's just like, could he just be hearing voices? Or like, is he really hearing the voice of God? And I made a comment to Jess that it's so interesting that like, it's painful, like taking on this power. And like, it's so interesting because so many people try to, like, they want to be able to hear God and hear God's voice and get to that point. It's just like, is that really what you want?
Right.
Because like, if this is what it's really like, it's painful. It's a lot of responsibility and pressure. And obviously, like in this film, it's portrayed as like a physical, just painful experience, getting that much power coming down upon you. And those are such interesting scenes and how they are portrayed that way in this film. And like, that one scene is so creepy when he's like walking by that water and like on the stones and stuff, and he just like, who's there? And it keeps like cutting back and is like, you being followed? Something here? Somebody saying something? And then that's the part where like starts grabbing his head and falls to the ground in anguish. And like that's the word of God is like painful.
Yes.
And And like obviously you have other scenes like him out in the desert, and you have like the snake coming up. That damn snake. And then you get a lion showing up. And was that Harvey Keitel
I don't
voicing
think
the
that was
lion?
Harvey Keitel's voice. It was I pulled up the cast because I've seen his face a bunch of times. I think that was Victor Argo, the Apostle Peter.
Okay.
It could have been Keitel, but it sounded like it didn't sound like Harvey Keitel's voice, the voice of the lion.
Mhm.
It was if it wasn't Victor, if it wasn't Peter, then it was Judas.
Yeah, because like you could tell they'd like modulize the voice a little bit. But
Yeah.
like, and then you have like the pyre of flames, and like they're all visually striking. And like this is a beautiful film. And
I wonder was David Bowie the voice of the flame?
now I'm trying to remember. I just watched this morning.
You're right. Well,
So-
well, you wouldn't know just by watching it though.
Yeah, exactly.
But it would be interesting to know. It could have been Scorsese.
Could have been Quentin Tarantino.
Been Tarantino, right?
See, if Tarantino made The Last Temptation of Christ, he would have voiced the pyre of flames. I wonder if he would have done an Australian accent.
Oh, hopefully not. Oh my God. Yeah. Who voices the lion? Harvey Keitel is the voice of the lion, according to the internet. Let's see. I love these questions. Did Jesus have a wife? I love it. I'm not going to click on that one.
But like, I thought it was Harvey Keitel.
You were right. I don't know why I thought it was the other guy. Yeah.
For some reason, I'm pretty good with stuff like that. I had one of those moments because like at the end of the new Marvel movie Eternals, there's an after the credit scene, and there's just like somebody off screen says something.
Yeah.
And I heard everybody like this person. I'm like right off the bat, I knew exactly who it was. And then people are like, that's not them. I'm like, you need to watch more movies. Because I'm like, I know that voice.
Totally.
But
I love when that happens. I kind of love it because it's always fun to kind of guess who the hell is that? Oh shit.
Yeah. So, but Alex, do you have any last minute thoughts, comments, things that you want to bring up about The Last Temptation of Christ?
There's a lot to say about this film. I definitely recommend it for people. I think a lot of people will, I grew up with a lot of friends who were either atheists back then, or, by the time I hung out with them, or they're atheists now, and every time I tell them about it, they were the friends I grew up with in New Jersey, just, a few blocks down from me. And every time I tell them about it, they're like, first they make a face like this, and then I say, yeah, Willem Dafoe plays Jesus. They go, oh really? And Harvey Keitel plays Judas. Oh really? Like they get all excited about it, like it's the Reservoir Dogs version of the Christ story. So what I would recommend for people is just like, don't be, if you're an atheist or you're not religious, don't be turned away by this, because I think this is one of the most relatable stories of Jesus that I've ever heard. And yeah.
And I think we all have faith in something, whether it's something outside of ourselves or faith in ourselves.
I think it's human nature. I think we have to feel connected to something. When we don't, I know, like I say, when I don't, I struggle. I really struggle when I'm not connected to something. For me, I usually find it through music, and then I lose it. At least that's been my experience over the past 2.5, 3 years. Is I'll pick up an instrument and I'll write a song, and then a day or two will go by, and now I'm just I don't have it anymore. So it's always and I think if you talk with people who are getting older, and don't necessarily have that drive anymore, aren't connected to, some people really need to feel connected to something bigger than just what's coming in the paycheck, what's coming at the next day at work. Mm-hmm. That stuff's important too, but if we're not connected to something bigger spiritually, whether, then I think I think we lose our way. I think we've like, well, what are we doing? Well, what are we doing all this for? You know.
And this is what that film's about. However you want to take that faith. I think that's why this film's so relatable. And it's such an interesting adaptation of, Jesus' story. And I remember the first time I heard about this, I'm like, Martin Scorsese made a movie about Jesus, and just didn't realize. And now it seems so obvious. Like, it's somebody who's spent so much time talking about his faith in films. It's just like, of course he had this Kundun in silence.
Yeah.
Duh. So, and I'll be getting those too. But as we wrap up talking about our feature of the week, time to talk about some recommendations. So, Alex, what would you like to recommend to lovely people listening to the show?
I would definitely recommend House of Gucci. Most of you probably already seen it, but that's the most recent thing that I've seen, and it was entertaining. It was very entertaining. I had some great acting. Probably one of the most entertaining sex scenes ever that I've ever seen. I was laughing my ass off. I thought it was so good. And then also, the first 45 minutes is like a freaking Valentine. It really is. So I'm not going to say what I don't like about it. I'll kind of just let people go out and have fun. Just go have fun with it. People take things too seriously these days. So just go have fun with it. It's a fun movie.
Jared Leto definitely wasn't taking it too seriously. But Papa. Oh my God. Oh, see, all the people that are upset, including me, about Chris Pratt being Mario in the new animated Mario movie. We need Jared Leto to play Mario, because that's exactly who he's playing in this movie.
Chris Pratt, I gotta say, you've seen the 5-year engagement, right?
Yes.
So, because, I think because of work and because of my brain or whatever, those movies just it's like chocolate cake. Nom, nom, nom,
yeah.
Nom. Chris Pratt in 5-year engagement, man, that is one of the funniest performances I've ever seen in my life. Forget Jurassic World, man. He needs to be freaking do comedies, man. Do comedies.
Well,
hilarious.
He blew up because of Parks and Rec, because Andy was hilarious. There's a whole entire Facebook page of just Andy Dwyer doing the excited Chris Pratt face, and because it was great. And I do miss that. And I have so many feelings about that Super Mario movie that I'm not going to talk about right now. But House of Gucci definitely was a crazy ride. And it's trashy, it's sleazy, and it's exactly the kind of thing you could use to just sit back for 2 hours and 40 minutes and just eat it up. Ridley Scott's on a roll.
He is. He's back. He has some duds, that's for sure. But this year, this is a good year for him. I still need to see The Last Duelist. I need to see.
Well, you know what's interesting? His first film was The Duelists,
right? And
now he has The Last Duel.
And The Duelist. That was De Niro, right? Or was that
Keitel? Keitel, and
who was the other actor?
I for some reason I thought it was a Carradine, but I need to double check this.
Oh, it is a Carradine.
Keith Carradine, there it is.
Keith Carradine, that's right.
Yep.
Holy crap.
Oh, and Albert Finney's in it too. See, that I actually put this on my watch list because I had never seen The Duelists. So it's on my watch list now. Now that I've seen The Last Duel, it's sequel, obviously, right? Because it has to be, right? No, it's definitely not. And The Last Duel is about rape and stuff like that. So it's a heavy movie.
Holy shit.
It's not a feel-good movie unless you're watching the scenes with Ben Affleck in it, because he's basically frat boy Prince. He plays it so perfect though. Perfect. Because the thing is, I saw the trailers, I'm like, what's Ben Affleck doing in this movie? Because him and Matt Damon wrote it. And then I watched the movie, I'm like, oh, now I know, because he's perfect. This guy's a douche, and Ben Affleck plays him so perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, you know, and we've as a country, as a culture, we've just thrown that at him. So I don't think he has a choice other than to just. He seems like such a nice guy. I don't think he's a bad person. He
Like,
seems like
I know he has obviously has some demons and stuff like that that he's
yeah, but
dealt with, and like he seems to be doing good. He's back with J Lo,
good.
and
Maybe I should like hook up with one of my ex-girlfriends. Jesus, you know.
wait, one of
Hey,
your ex-girlfriends was Jesus?
you never know. Yes, her name was Jesus.
It's one way to be. It's one way to talk about getting back to your faith and get back with my ex, my faith. Look where we're going now. We're spiraling. We better.
That's a crazy. That's one way to end the video. Yeah.
So my recommendations, besides Alex's House of Gucci, so I watched this film. This definitely isn't for everybody, but for all you cinephiles out there that like a good, like really artful kind of film, The Year of the Everlasting Storm is an anthology film that's on VOD right now. And 7 directors, each with their own section, including David Lowery, who made The Green Knight, coming all back full circle now. And like, if you've ever seen any of his films, like A Ghost Story and stuff like that, like, you know the vibe this is probably going to have. It's very humanistic. It kind of deals with like things that like COVID caused and isolation and stuff like that. And each of these stories are very human and very like grounded and beautifully shot and moving. And I just thought it was a really interesting film. I watched it last night. And then 'Tis the Season, and I just watched this with my mom last weekend, like I have for every single year since I was a child, The Muppets Christmas Carol. If you want a Christmas movie to watch,
Okay.
accept no substitutes. So, because how can you say no to Michael Caine as Ebenezer Scrooge and then the Muppets? So basically the whole story set up as Gonzo, everybody's favorite alien, is Charles Dickens. And him and Rizzo the Rat are telling the story of a Christmas carol. And they're going along the whole story with Ebenezer Scrooge, played by Michael Caine, Stantler and Waldorf for the Marleys. Like, I know all the words of all these songs and sing them along the whole entire time watching this movie. Because, like, you know, it doesn't quite feel like Christmas unless I watch the Muppet Christmas Carol. And I'm extremely biased, but I think it's the best adaptation of the Christmas Carol.
Nice.
There you go.
Nice.
Scrooge is great too. That's up there with Bill Murray.
That's a fun one.
And not
when
quite the Robert Zemeckis one with Jim Carrey. That one's a little creepy.
Yeah.
And not in like a good way. Like the whole fully CGI stop motion thing. Like, kudos to Jim Carrey for being committed that whole movie. But like, I don't know. It didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's 'Tis the Season.
I'll give it closer to the day. I'll give it a shot.
There you go. I do indeed have some of those songs on my Spotify, just for the record, along with assortment of other Muppet songs. So I enjoy the Muppets.
No judgment. No judgment.
I legitimately have the Muppet movie, Muppets Christmas Carol, Muppets Treasure Island, the Muppets, and Muppets Most Wanted, all sitting down right here. So I don't have them all, but I have most of them.
Yeah.
But you know, that's a wrap here. Welcome to the Wasteland. Alex, thank you again for coming on, as always.
Thank you, man. Of course. Always good. Always good.
And we're in the process of figuring out who the next director we're going to be doing on the show after I'm done Scorsese in April. And I'm taking my swell old time with a fun tournament on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram and you want to vote every day and go over to the polls that I've been posting, we're chugging away through the first round, and definitely a lot of classic directors are beating up some like younger ones and like newer directors and stuff like that. Got to believe in The Godfather. Francis Ford Coppola took down Denis Villeneuve. I'm sure if anybody's watching this, the internet's going to blow up.
I disagree. Yeah, I think Denis is a better director. He's more consistent overall. Yeah.
Yeah, he's already made more better movies than Francis Ford Coppola has, and Coppola's been directing since the 70s. But Francis Ford Coppola's friends with Martin Scorsese. He was there to hug him when he won that Oscar for The Pardon. Along with Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. Such an that's a special moment at the Oscars.
Totally.
But so hope you all enjoyed our conversation, Last Temptation of Christ. Hope you tune in next week when I talk about Goodfellas with my brother. So very interesting to hear what my brother has to say about Goodfellas. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about Joe Pesci and dropping F-bombs and being Italian, honestly. But thank you, Alex, again for coming on, and thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.